Okay, let's look at F9 financial management. We're now at the end of the skills level on ACCA. So we're at that tipping point between the skills level and the professional level. And you have to appreciate that that's the sort of level that your examiner is looking for in F9. Let's see the sort of things that are involved. What is it all about? Well, F9, it may be at the end of the skills level, but it's the first time that you guys have seen financial management, at least from the perspective of ACCA. So, it is an introductory financial management paper, and there is nothing that's come before in this area. I suppose there is a tiny bit of overlap between F9 and maybe what some of you may have studied at paper F2, all those many papers ago. But again, don't worry about that. It being an introduction, your examiner wants to examine the questions at an introductory level, and anything that you need to know will be fully covered during the course. At F9, there is a blend between the computations, you have to know the computations, and your interpretational skill. And what has happened as the F9 paper has progressed is that the computations have remained relatively constant in the degree of difficulty required. But what your examiner has done, not surprisingly, is as the paper has developed, he has pushed the interpretational requirement a little bit higher year on year. This means that what you typically have are 40 to 60 relatively basic marks, but what is called the mark ramp, the difficulty associated with marks, becomes that much more difficult for each mark thereafter. And there are between 10 and 20 marks on every exam where your interpretational skills of what presumably you have already calculated is going to be at a relatively high level that not all of us can do. But one of the great things is, of course, you don't have to do the super difficult stuff to get a solid pass mark. And based on that, F9 is not a big problem. Now, what's involved in this paper? If we look at the syllabus areas, there are 8 of them. But what we have to appreciate is that of those 8, the first 2, financial management function and financial management environment, are relatively small in terms of mark allocation. In simple terms, all they are is the introduction, making sure that you have some basic underlying knowledge before you look at everything else. So if we were to look at the other topic areas, what we've got here is working capital, investment appraisal, business finance, cost of capital, business valuation, and risk management. And if you were to do an analysis of the relative importance of these questions, number 1 ranks investment appraisal, comes up every time, normally for a large topic area. Number 2, working capital management. Number 3, business finance. Number 4, cost of capital, maybe equal with business valuation. And then finally, risk management. This basically means that if you want to get a solid pass mark in this exam, you have to have a good, solid knowledge of all of these topic areas. And we'll see why when we look at the exam format in a moment. But if you really want to make sure that you're covering the bases, the 3 biggies are investment appraisal, working capital management, and business finance. If we were to look at how this paper is examined, I'll just remind you, first of all, it's a 3-hour paper with a 15-minute reading time. There are 4 questions. 4 compulsory questions. And of course, when you look at an exam having compulsory questions, what does it immediately tell you? Well, it immediately tells you that you must look at a little bit of everything, otherwise you are going to get caught out in the exam. So you've got your 4 questions, but remember we said we had 8 topic areas. And this is the other thing that we've got to pick up on here. We would expect almost every question to have 2 or more examinable topics within it. And that maybe is the challenge. I don't think that the paper itself is that difficult. But the one thing I think that a lot of students find a bit tricky is the idea that you have to chop and change from one technique to another within the same question. 10 marks here, 10 marks there, 5 marks there. And that, I think, is what makes it slightly problematic. What do you have to do to be successful? Well, the first thing to highlight here is that when we look at financial management, it is based on a lot of theory. And as such, you have to understand the theoretical concepts underpinning what we're doing. Most of these are not too difficult. In fact, there are 2 or 3 concepts that underpin virtually everything that we look at. But just make sure that you grasp these, not only because it will make the computations that much easier, but also it will make it so much easier for you to do those interpretational bits that we talked about before. Secondly, you've got to understand the formulae. There's a whole host of formulae, both given on a formulae sheet by the examiner and that you have to learn. You have to be able to understand the formulae and be able to apply the numbers to them. Again, just practice, practice, practice to make sure that you can do that. Now, once you've got those 2 bits out of the way, you've got your theory bit, you've got your formulae sorted, then you have to be able to understand how the questions are put together. Remember, I said a moment ago that we're going to have 2 or 3 topic areas in most questions. And if that's the case, you've got to be able to understand the requirements. In simple terms, your examiner is a good guy. What he does is he calls a spade a spade. But you have to make sure that you can interpret the requirements in a literal sense. Because if you can do that, you're a very, very long way towards success. Finally, of course, as with any exam, you must practice past exam questions. And you must do these in exam conditions. Because one of the issues with F9, as with so many papers, is that it's terribly easy to waste a lot of time on a question. And what you've got to be is brutal with yourself. You've got to say, I'm not interested in getting a perfect answer. What I'm interested in is getting a solid answer somewhere between 15 to 17 marks within the time available. Because that's the way that exams are passed.